Dad, but can you do it in a loincloth like Tarzan?
Tarzan, bring it home this Tuesday.
Born in 1968, Anthony Frank Hawk took a liking to skateboarding at a young age of 9, and in only 2 years at age 11 would begin entering competitions. Despite his youth, he was making a lot of major impressions with his ability to shred. By 12, got his first sponsor with Dogtown Skateboards, and by 14, entered skateboarding professionally through the Powell Peralta professional team. As the 80s marched on during one of skateboarding's first major golden eras, Tony was easily one of the biggest names in the field of vert skating. But the popularity of vert skateboarding was getting thin by the late 80s. At the time, skateboarding was seen as a fad, and while some fads just result in bargain bins selling pogs and fidget spinners for $1, skateboarding as a fad was hit hard when places to skate were getting limited as skate parks were getting deconstructed and leaving skaters nowhere to skate.
There was a big transition in the late 80s, early 90s from vert skating. Like, vert skating was like what was on television, it was like what was portrayed as the cool thing in skateboarding, but vert skating wasn't accessible for every kid, especially like myself. I didn't have a vert ramp. I had a driveway and a street in front of my house.
In that time, there wasn't all these skate parks to go skate like there is now. So it was such a different time compared to like, oh, where are we gonna skate today?
With all the skate park closures in the late 80s, skating, the only way skating could survive was if you were doing it on the streets, because there were no facilities designated for skateboarding anymore.
So a new form of skating had to take over. It was called street skating. Why limit yourself to a boring ramp when the world can be your ramp? The country was a concrete jungle, and even if you live in rural areas, there was always a downtown. Even with the rise of street skating, however, skateboarding was still on a massive decline. Hawk was feeling that his time in the world of skateboarding was coming to an end, and luckily, there was a way to keep the money flowing in. A fellow skateboarder of Powell Peralta, Per Wheelander, was looking to start a skateboard company and looked to Hawk as a business partner in 1992. Hawk agreed, and Birdhouse Skateboards was founded, and turned out to be a big success, going even to this day. Thankfully, Tony could pay the bills going forward, but that was just small potatoes as the skateboard industry was looking to collapse. But thankfully, in only a few years, there would be a savior: the X Games. Despite its gimmicky approach to many skaters, the X Games was ultimately the saving grace of not only skateboarding, but many extreme sports altogether. Of course, Tony would perform in the games beginning with the first year in 1995, and ended up taking a lot of gold over the course of the next few years. Tony is considered one of the best vert skaters of all time, not because he was exceptionally well at it, but he was also responsible for inventing a good number of tricks. How many? 5? 10? 12? Well, 89 just to be precise. But probably his most famous movie invented would be the 900, where a skater would do 2.5 rotations on their skateboard, aka 900 degrees, and land. And it was at the 1999 X Games where Tony Hawk would perform the greatest achievement of his life, and a feat only achieved by 8 other people on vert ramps specifically, and only topped by the 1080 achieved in 2020 by 11-year-old Brazilian Guy Curie.
Here tonight, I don't know where he's getting this energy. These guys been going on. Let's hear it. Tony Hawk. Get the voodoo vibe going, get him going, pushing it up. Everybody picture it, here we go. Feel it. Are you kidding me? Yeah, look at this. Tony Hawk, everybody.
After performing the world's first 900, Tony Hawk decided to end his career there, announcing the end of his professional career after achieving, in his words, the greatest day of his life. Well, sort of. He would continue performing at the X Games up to 2003. After that, he officially called it quits. And after a 21-year career and an 8-year run at the X Games, he would receive 3 bronze medals, 3 silver, and 10 gold. Tony Hawk really didn't need to prove anything at this point, as he pulled off the greatest feat in vert skate, had a long career at this point, and more specifically, he was pretty much the household name of competitive extreme sports, receiving many guest starring and cameo roles in films and TV shows. And to add on to the popularity after the 900, a certain video game would come out that Tony Hawk signed a deal with in the previous year. The same year he would have the best day of his life, Tony Hawk Pro Skater for PlayStation would hit store shelves.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Now everyone thinks they can skate like Tony.
Skateboarding video games were here and there near the dawn of the commercial video game. Games like 720 Degrees in arcades by Atari and Skate or Die on PC by Electronic Arts were some of the biggest titles during skateboarding's first big popularity era of the late 80s. But they came and went as skateboarding did. But it was after the X Games entered the scene that made skateboarding hot once again, and now video games are out of the pixel era and into the 3D era, making skateboarding games a lot more appealing. 1995's ESPN Extreme Games by Sony, later renamed One Extreme after losing the license, with the sequel getting named Two Extreme, 1997's Top Skater by Sega, and 1998's Street Skater, published outside of Japan by Electronic Arts. These were all major titles post-X Games that were gaining traction by the hungry skateboarder crowd, and one company was eyeing this newfound popularity. Their name was Activision. Activision was a publisher founded by a group of ex-Atari employees seeking compensation for making some of the most popular Atari 2600 games during the 2600's popularity, turning into the first third-party publisher with games like Kaboom, and of course the 2600 classic, Pitfall. And then the video game crash of '83 happened, leaving them pretty much scrapping by for the rest of the '80s as a PC developer of mostly forgotten games, and pretty much all the founders leaving the company. In 1988, they changed their names to Mediagenic once they decided to venture into other avenues with a bunch of names for various products, like Activision for the major video games, Infocom for interactive fiction games, and 10.0 for business application software. But it wasn't enough to save the company, as they reported major losses heading into the 90s. By 1990, there was one man who saw great potential in Mediagenic, especially considering who they were back in the early 80s at their glory, and he too wanted to bring Mediagenic back to its former glory. And his name was Bobby Kotick. Yes, that Bobby Kotick. Kotick bought a good chunk of shares of the failing Mediagenic and became the current owner of the company in 1991. Under new ownership, he changed the name back to Activision and began to restructure the company back into video games, and in the process definitely got back on their feet. But by the late 90s is where the company began to get seriously more popular, acquiring license to make Disney tie-in games as well as a few successes like Vigilante 8. But none of them would reach the peak of their greatest success heading into the new millennium, a skateboard series developed by Neversoft. Neversoft was founded in 1994 by Joel Jewett, Mick West, and Chris Ward, three ex-employees of Malibu Interactive, a game studio subsidiary of Malibu Comics, which was in the process of merging into Marvel. So there was no better time to quit. Neversoft found immediate work for Playmates Interactive, another publishing subsidiary, this time of Playmates Toys, who needed a game to help sell their new line of toys. And those toys were with a pretty basic side-scroller hack and slash for the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in 1996. That didn't do so well critically, but what do you expect with someone's first game for a toy company's video game division? Playmates looked towards Neversoft again for a game based on Marvel's Ghost Rider character they had the rights to, but the game never ended up happening. But their company was ever growing, and Neversoft looked to create their own project they could hopefully sell, a project called Big Guns, a third-person shooter where you control a big mecha running around shooting stuff. As a proposition, it seemed like it could do really better with some funding behind it, and Sony themselves seemed interested in giving Big Guns a go as a PlayStation exclusive. So the greenlight was set for Big Guns, now called Exodus, in 1996, probably looking to be finished in 1997, only it didn't end up happening. Sony canceled the project, leaving Neversoft in dire straits with nothing to replace it with, other than porting Playmates' PC game MDK to the PlayStation using the same engine. Other than that, Neversoft was on the brink of filing for Chapter 11. That was until Activision was very interested in their Big Guns build, and were hoping that they could help on a project starring a certain celebrity. That's right, Apocalypse starring Bruce Willis.
Welcome to Apocalypse, a hot new game from Activision that is the first to texture map a real person's face onto a CG model's body.
Welcome to paradise, kid.
And that face belongs to action movie star Bruce Willis.
Time to get jacked up for Armageddon.
In 1996, a game in Activision was going through development hell called Apocalypse. Its big selling point was that your main character would team up with a character named Trey Kincaid, voiced by and motion captured by movie star Bruce Willis.
You can run, but you can't hide!
With the original intent of creating sort of an interactive buddy film with Bruce Willis as the buddy. I'm not sure who originally developed it, but it was clear things were not going well, and Activision found the perfect base to finish the project with Neversoft's Big Guns. So with Neversoft on the project, they decided to switch things up, mainly in that Trey Kincaid would be the main character, which in my eyes was a much better idea. Video games have gotten to the point where you can play as a famous star now. Apocalypse got decent reviews, and considering I never heard of it despite starring a famous movie star, Makes me think it didn't really do that well. But still, it was impressive a team took a struggling game and managed to get out a playable product in 9 months. So much so that Activision asked them to work on a new game they were planning, a skateboarding one. Of course, the Neversoft team had no interest in skateboarding, but when it was between this or potential bankruptcy, what else did you have to lose? Modifying the engine from Apocalypse, they went to work planning out their new game. But there was one catch. Activision wanted a big name on the project, and there was no other skater that could be big enough to sell their game other than Tony Hawk, who was actually in talks with another company for their skateboarding video game. A company called Rockstar, and their game called Thrasher Skate Destroy. If you watch this series, you might remember this game as one of the games I talked about in my previous video, which I'll put up a little card now if you haven't seen it. But yeah, if I knew Tony Hawk was in talks to put his name on that game, I surely would have talked about it. Because unsurprisingly, Tony Hawk was not impressed with the game, saying it was as hard to learn the controls in that game as it is to learn skateboarding in real life. Tony Hawk was eventually invited to Activision to sign a deal regarding their skateboarding game. A very boring experience to Tony, with explanations on Activision's sales charts and why their brand was such a good deal. But then came the moment where they let Tony play Neversoft's early build, and right then and there, Tony knew there was something amazing about this game, and never looked back on Rockstar and Skate and Destroy. Tony Hawk came in and showed up in a t-shirt and ripped up cargo pants, and Activision had all these executives, all lined up in a conference room. They sat Tony down and they started showing him PowerPoint after PowerPoint, like revenue this and Activision that, and I could just see Tony just sort of sinking lower and lower in his chair. Seems like he was kind of bored out of his mind. But at the end of the meeting, we actually got to roll in the demo level that Neversoft had created. What they actually showed me was Bruce Willis with a gun strapped to his back riding on a skateboard through this wasteland. As silly as that sounds, as soon as I played it and I felt some of the controls, I knew that was the game. As mentioned in a video before, Neversoft's big influence when working on the first Pro Skater was the Sega arcade game Top Skater, that the crew would play during lunch breaks at a local bowling alley just to get the feel right on the game they were going to create. And even the direction the game was going in, as their first levels involved going down a straight path, kinda like a lot of skateboarding games at the time. One key difference was at the end of the stage would be a little level to skate around in until time ran out. Things changed when the crew began to observe actual skaters and seeing the kind of moves they pulled off that couldn't be pulled off in a downhill track. Forget going down a straight path, skating around a little area and exploring is what this game will be. And with Tony Hawk himself helping out and making the skating feel precise as possible and requesting notable skaters add their likeness into the game to give it more skating cred, it seems like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was going to be a nice little gem for Christmas of 1999 on PlayStation. Next thing you know, it's one of the biggest games of the year. It managed to hit both a hardcore and casual gamer market probably not seen since the days of the Super Mario Bros. / Duck Hunt combo cartridge. So what was it about this little game that just captured everyone's hearts? Well, I just say it comes down to simplicity. Gaming was only getting bigger and bigger with stories and cutscenes and all the like, and that can get grating. In Tony Hawk, all you do is skate around the level, jam out to the killer soundtrack, and collect tapes, which was inspired by Super Mario 64. In these levels, you have to complete 5 separate tasks to obtain them, and as you obtain more, they unlock more levels with 9 in all. At least for 6 of them, the other 3 are simple competitions where you do tricks and be graded on your performance. And of course, the multiplayer options. In the grand scheme of things, you can pretty much please everyone with a simple game. And simplicity sure sold. On PlayStation alone, the game sold 3.5 million units, making it the 23rd best-selling game for the platform, tied with Oddworld Abe's Odyssey and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And with its success on PlayStation, Activision hired some other companies to port the game to other platforms like the Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast in the following year, with the Nintendo 64 version selling 1.6 million copies. And also got a game for Game Boy Color because you gotta cover your bases, and in 2003 an N-Gage version, because why not? And even with the sales, it was a critical darling, with the PlayStation version getting a 92 on Metacritic. Activision was officially back on top for the first time in 17 years, and as expected, they needed Pro Skater to become a franchise.
Look at what we're launching. Now for N64 and Game Boy Advance. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. We're talking lots of new tricks and hundreds of insane new combos. There's even more courses, a park designer, and a dream team of skaters to choose from. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 for N64 and Game Boy Advance. Rated E for everyone.
Neversoft went to work quickly on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 to be released in the following year of 2000, and of course Activision went all out with a big party at a Best Buy in West Los Angeles. Tony Hawk was there signing autographs, and KROQ FM DJ Jed the Fish to host the whole shebang and give out prizes to the guests. Understandably, it was a big deal. But what matters most is the game. Well, as expected, it was pretty much the same game as before, just made better now that the groundwork was completed in the first one. Just to make the game better with the ability to manual, being able to create both your own skater and skate park, also added was more than 5 missions a level, up to 10, and changed the tapes into cash money. Based on the mission objective itself, you get more money based on the difficulty of the mission, and also some extra money in the stage itself for you to collect. Collect enough and it's on to the next level. Much like the first game, Pro Skater 2 understood it was simplicity that drove the series' popularity and adds upon everything great from the first game. And unlike the first, Activision was ready to give the gaming public Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on any system it could, starting off with the, as expected, PlayStation release. This would be the only port Neversoft themselves would handle, as everything else was done by other studios, such as an actual PC release for those high-quality graphics, then a Dreamcast release, and also a Game Boy Color game, once again sharing the same name, but just being an original game for the little portable. Following that, in 2001 would come a Game Boy Advance release, and this is interesting. You'd expect a same name, different game situation with the Game Boy Color release, but no. They actually recreated everything nearly down to a T, just in little 32-bit handheld form, which honestly blew my mind when I found out about this. Then after that, a version for Mac, and at the tail end of it all, a Nintendo 64 version for all the Nintendo kids. Also worth mentioning in 2001 would be a port for the Xbox known as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X. A combination of both Pro Skater 1 and 2 plus 5 new levels, and taking some elements that were added into Pro Skater 3, but I'll talk about those elements in a bit. Understandably, Activision saw Pro Skater 2 as a big deal, and in the reception area, well, it certainly was a big deal. The PlayStation version sold 3.1 million units as the 30th best-selling game on the console, and to the critics, oh boy. The PlayStation version itself was so beloved by the critics that it got a 98 out of 100 on Metacritic. Not only did every critic they listed love the game, they freaking loved it. It being a 98 means that it's tied as the second best reviewed game of all time alongside Grand Theft Auto 4 and Soul Calibur for Dreamcast. And the other ports were no joke either. 97 on the Dreamcast port and a 91 on the PC port. It was nuts, and it wasn't going to stop here. Activision needed their killer series to keep going after a monumental triumph like that. And with the next generation of consoles entering the scene in 2001, it was time to take Tony Hawk into slicker, cleaner 3D, with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3.
Activision O2.
One positive of the 6th generation was that it was the only generation to have the 3 rivaling consoles have roughly the same specs as each other, allowing for non-first-party games to get multi-console releases with usually minor differences. And with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, this would be the first time Neversoft would develop for more than one console. Of course, the multi-console release would have to wait, since the major demographic for Tony Hawk at the time was, of course, the PlayStation brand, so debuting first would be the PlayStation 2 version on October 30th, 2001. But here's something interesting. Activision actually had another studio make a version of Pro Skater 3 simultaneously as Neversoft's version for PlayStation 1. This was done by Shabba Games, who before this was also making Pro Skater clones, and then Activision acquired them to make Pro Skater clones for them, including the PlayStation 1 version of Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX, and of course the PS1 version of Pro Skater 3. But the funny thing is about this port of Pro Skater 3 that was actually released the very same day as the PlayStation 2 version. I guess that's how big the PlayStation and Tony Hawk was. And funnily enough, that PlayStation 1 release would end up being a big hit. 2.1 million units sold as the 40th best-selling game on the console, outselling other games like the first Silent Hill, Parappa the Rapper, Twisted Metal 3, and the first Tekken. The PS2 release of Pro Skater 3 would also be a huge hit seller with 2.4 million units, making it the 51st best-selling game for the console. Moving into November, the next release would be on the Game Boy Color. Really? We're still pushing that console? The Game Boy Advance had just released and sure has backward compatibility with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but still compare what the Game Boy Advance could do to Color, and it's no wonder the Game Boy Color was dead in no time. I guess it just sold well enough, I suppose. Pro Skater 3 would get the Game Boy Advance treatment in 2002. Also in November, the second Neversoft port with the GameCube release, also released at the system's launch. So finally, Nintendo kids can experience the Pro Skater games without the cutbacks of the Nintendo 64 version. Moving into next year of March 2002, the Xbox release would finally see a debut once again by Neversoft, probably not to create competition with Pro Skater 2X, which was an Xbox launch title. Then the Game Boy Advance game, and also a PC release done by Gearbox Software, who before this did Half-Life 1 expansion packs, as well as the PlayStation 2 release of Half-Life. And of course is best known today as the team behind Brother in Arms and Borderlands. Then in August, we would get the Nintendo 64 version. Wait, what? The Tony Hawk series is no stranger to strange ports, such as the first game to N-Gage, and just wait until the Pro Skater 4 episode. But even still, the Nintendo 64 was pretty much abandoned by Nintendo in 2001 by the time the GameCube was released. 5 games released for it after the GameCube launched in Japan. The gap between Pro Skater 3 and the last game released for Nintendo 64 before it is an 8-month difference, and a 9-month difference for the last North American release. It's weird, but it does make for an interesting story, as it is both the last game released on Nintendo 64 and the only Nintendo 64 game released in 2002. This port was done by Edge of Reality, who did the other 2 Pro Skater 64 games. And finally in 2003, a Mac version of the game published by Aspyr, I believe, a company specializing in bringing big-name games to Mac, and developed by Beanox, which would be their first game after Pillars of Gardendahl in 2001, and would be behind a lot more of Activision's PC games going into the future. Whew, alright, that was a lot of ports. So now it's finally time to talk about the game. Wow, it's just another Pro Skater game. Continuing the tradition of the first 2 games, the goal of the game is to skate around a small area, pulling off missions in a small amount of time. Complete enough missions and you unlock the next area until all the stages are unlocked. Also a few levels where you just get a high score. It's proven to be a success, so I'm not surprised they didn't change anything up, really. The only major change is the format of the missions once again. The money-based missions were dropped in favor of returning to simply beating missions, and the next level will unlock after beating enough. And going forward, this will be the default way of game progression for the future of the series. Worth mentioning in Pro Skater 2, the money also served through upgrading your character, which was changed to simple icons for you to collect. Added into the game for the first time would be revert manuals, allowing you to score even more by doing a manual, NPCs within the level usually being a part of the scenery or a part of a mission, hidden combos, and probably my favorite inclusion, a balance bar for when you grind, which is a very thankful inclusion because one of my favorite things to do in this genre is grind about. And it seemed like all the Tony Hawk clones had this feature before Pro Skater 3, so it was about time the grandfather of this genre caught on to this innovation. Also online support, so you can play all the multiplayer modes with somebody on the other side of the country. This feature was not in the GameCube version, obviously, because if your name isn't Phantasy Star Online, you weren't getting online support on this console. But it was on the PlayStation 2, and it became the first PlayStation 2 game to have online functionality. And as expected, the PC port did too. Since Xbox Live was launching in November of 2002, the Xbox version did not have online either. Still pretty cool how this one feature makes the game feel like a big jump in evolution compared to the last 2. As for a lineup of skaters, the roster is pretty much unchanged from Pro Skater 2. All the staples from Tony, obviously, to Andrew Reynolds, Steve Cabarello, Rodney Mullen, Kareem Campbell, Alyssa Steamer, just to name a few, are back and ready to skate. The only absence would be Bob Burnquist, who debuted in the first game and couldn't be in this game due to him lending his likeness to another skateboarding game, ESPN X Games Skateboarding, from the same year. Don't worry though, he will be back. As for new skaters, there would be but one new default skater, but it certainly would be a big one. It's Bam Margera. Yes, the Jackass star and professional skateboarder would make his debut in this game and continue lending his likeness in these games until Tony Hawk's Proving Grounds, and would actually play a big role in Tony Hawk's Underground 2. Not to mention his brother Jess Margera's band CKY would have a song in the soundtrack.
Bam Margera, what will he do next?
Whatever the fuck I want.
And that's why he wasn't in Jackass Forever. Following off the heels of Pro Skater 2, Pro Skater 3 would once again have hidden guest characters. In Pro Skater 2, there would be but one major guest character with Spider-Man, due to Neversoft making a Spider-Man game around the same time. Probably due to being on more powerful hardware, Pro Skater 3 decides to go all out on fun guest characters to unlock, including Officer Dick and Private Carrera from previous games, But for new skaters to play as, we have Kelly Slater, the professional surfer who ditches a skateboard for a magical skating surfboard. Could he be in the game due to the fact he had his own game by Activision on the horizons? He only wears swim trunks, so it's pretty uncomfortable to watch him bail and there's just a pool of blood afterwards. Ugh. We also got a sexy demon lady, very appreciated, Ollie the magic bum, and the Neversoft eyeball finally makes a playable debut on a zombified body. And never again after this point. Wait, he has garbage stats? How dare you, Neversoft. Of course, all those skaters are nothing compared to the main feature. Two absolute badasses who, as it turns out, can fucking shred. Wolverine of X-Men and Darth Maul of Star Wars are playable. Coincidentally, both of them would be owned by the same corporation in a decade's time, but let's ignore that and enjoy this game from a more innocent time. That's nice. There are also two version-exclusive characters, including Doom Guy from Doom for the PC version, once again badass, and a character named X-Ray in the Xbox version who appears to just be a skeleton. Why he needed to be an Xbox exclusive is beyond me. So that's really all the little details I can talk about alongside creating a park and a character creation returning, now with a female option. As for the game itself, I mean, if you love Pro Skater 1 and 2, this will definitely scratch that itch. And if you weren't really sold on those games or haven't played them, I think Pro Skater 3 is a great first title to jump into or give a second look, because this is the game that sold me on these extreme sports games. Since I was a kid who wasn't into sports period, these games seemed like a waste of time, but now I'm fully grown and I can truly see what made these games so appealing. I think what sold me on Pro Skater 3 is that it does have a more arcadey feel compared to 1 and 2. Sure, these games are pure arcadey bliss already, but I think this game takes it into its necessary extreme. Based on the levels specifically, Neversoft definitely pushed for more wackier stages. Pro Skater 1 and 2's idea for stages would either be someplace a skater would definitely skate, to a nice little fantasy like a whole mall to yourself to skate in. By 3, the stages were things like an active factory, a snowy parking lot with a bit of the wilderness to explore, to a lively airport, a cruise ship, and an oil rig. Yeah, I can't say I ever wanted to skate on an oil rig, but in the world of interactive electronics, I definitely want to now. And even then, the missions themselves have a bit more bite to them than simply collect 5 of a certain object, with more interaction required, like in the first stage, for example, turning on all these valves by grinding on them, and then pushing one of the workers into a body of water like an asshole. It definitely added a nice bit of flavor, and one nice detail about it I like is whenever I need to restart a mission, simply going into the menu and restarting takes about a second. Also, thank you for the little preview shots to give me a good idea on what to do. Now that I played 3 and gave 1 and 2 another chance, with a fresh set of expectations, I'm honestly in agreement with all the critics at the time. These are truly wonderfully fun games, and while I'm not drooling myself over them, in a way they do deserve all the love they got. They are a game of a bygone era where just simply jumping into a game is all you need. No cutscenes, no story, just plain goofy fun. As expected, the game got loved to death by the critics, with the PS2 version getting a 97 on Metacritic, and the Xbox version getting a 93, the GameCube version getting a 91, and the PC version getting a 90. Pro Skater was still a critical darling 2 years later, and of course that wasn't going to stop Activision from making Tony Hawk a series with a yearly release thanks to a contract with the Hawkman going into 2015. And as a result, we got 4 more games to cover over the course of the GameCube's life, with more to talk about after that. I'm not sure if I'll have a lot to say on those episodes, but that won't stop them from being a blast to play, and I'm looking forward to playing this series I missed out on as a kid. But in the meantime, I got a fantastic game like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 to come back to.